Lusine Stepanyan is the host of the Soulful Entrepreneur podcast, a podcast where she shares actionable insights and inspiring stories to help aspiring entrepreneurs align their personal growth with building impactful ventures. Today, she shares with us her journey from Armenia to the United States, how she navigated cultural transitions, her entrepreneurship, as well as her own personal growth. She discovers founding an educational center in Armenia, pursuing a master's degree at Duke University, as well as working as a consultant for the World Bank, all the while exploring her passion for entrepreneurship. Lucina emphasizes the importance of resilience, of finding purpose, as well as of learning from challenges which usually arise during creative endeavors. She also highlights the incredible value of networking and personal relationship, as well as balancing kindness with strategic thinking. She also reflects on the evolving process of starting her podcast, fostering growth and creating impact. On Guide Talk Spotlight, we explore the impactful journeys of diasporans excelling in their communities, either professionally, through business, or through their community impact. We uncover the challenges they've faced, the strategies that have led them to success, all the while providing insights and blueprints of their journeys to act as inspiration for all. Join us in discovering those largely under-recognized heroes making hugely positive impacts on their communities and the people around them.
So I was born and raised in Yerevan, and I was about 23, 24 when I founded an educational center in Armenia, which was mostly languages and professional development skills. And I ran it for about 4 years before coming to the US. And this is when I realized I want to be an entrepreneur. And I didn't really have a clear understanding of what project I will take later on. I had some passions and everything, but I wanted to do something bigger with my life to make more impact. And I realized that maybe I need to get a bit more of education. So I applied to study at Duke, and my degree is in policy, but my concentration is innovation and entrepreneurship. So very, very specifically focused on that. So it was a very interdisciplinary degree. I went to the business school, the Duke Innovation Entrepreneurship Center, the policy school, obviously. And so it was a very interesting combination of courses that I took at Duke. After graduation, it was the pandemic. So the worst time to graduate ever. And honestly, looking back, I don't know how I survived that. But when I moved to the US first, like during the school years, the 2 years, it was good because I was surrounded with a lot of people. It was fun and everything. But right after graduation, there was such a change. I felt very isolated, very lonely. And also, like, I was trying to find a job, all that. It was super difficult. I felt I had such a big identity crisis because I moved a country and I'm changing my career trajectory. I'm thinking about what to do next with my life. And I felt completely lost and I didn't know what I was going to do next. So, but I got the job with the bank, which was amazing. And primarily because I had really good connection and network from school. And my professor he just referred me, and it was an amazing way to get to the World Bank. As you said, it's a pretty competitive space. And just to get a position, it's a bit difficult. But I started working, and I am a consultant. So obviously I have more flexibility than people who are working, let's say, full-time. Well, I'm still full-time, but people who are staff, they have less flexibility. And on the side, I had a lot of interesting entrepreneurial projects that I was working on and just dabbling with different things. In 2022, I did Entrepreneurship Immersion Program, which is like a really good program organized by High Tech Community out of San Francisco, which is a community that is founded by Nerses Ohanyan and a few other people, Ben Talker. And essentially, it's like a community of entrepreneurs, Armenian entrepreneurs in the States. So I traveled to San Francisco for that, and I met a lot of entrepreneurs. We had a lot of interesting discussions, like visits and everything. And I was going through this, again, identity crisis on one hand. On the other hand, I had this desire to start my own thing and to create. Um, and so I started just talking to entrepreneurs about how they built their businesses and how not just the business side of it, but also the, you know, as you're building a business, you're also very much building yourself because you're changing. There are so many skills you need to learn.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I kind of started talking to them and realized that it's such an interesting personal growth story of every single entrepreneur that I talk to, um, that I wanted to do this podcast. And I thought, why not just bring it to public? And so Narcissus and I had a discussion, and he gave kind of like a thumbs up, let's do this. And I just a few months back, I started the podcast. So now I have a lot of things on my plate, which is the World Bank, the podcast, and some entrepreneurial projects that I'm still working on, which hopefully I'll be able to announce soon as well.
Yep.
Let me pause here because I've been talking a lot. Maybe
Yeah, no,
questions you want to deep dive into?
yeah. No, obviously there's a lot to unpack. So I think we'll get to your podcast, the Soulful Entrepreneur. Just before that, yeah, it's interesting you're talking about this, the sort of personal nature of going out on your own or backing yourself and your own ideas as an entrepreneur. I think it's I don't know how obvious this is to people, but it's obviously a very big contrast between being in a very structured environment working for someone else. I'm not quite sure what World Bank was like, and I think consulting is a bit more on the entrepreneurial side than the 9 to 5 full-time office vibe. But I found that myself that once I went out on my own, I actually didn't have the skills to just sit and work all day without someone hovering over me or having deadlines and that sort of stuff. And it took a little while to actually be able to structure myself. But obviously, once you do that, then it's very tailored and personal, and you can fit in all your, I don't know, other things that are important in your life other than career and work focus. So I think what's interesting with your story is, you've moved to a whole new country on the other side of the planet. Even though I do think Armenia and the US, I'm not quite sure about the eastern side as much, but I think they do share a lot of similarities in terms of how people live their lives. I think there's very little government input. Businesses are really important to dictate, not like they dictate the environment more so than civil society or the government. So how did you find, sorry to step back a little bit, but how did you find sort of maneuvering your, studying in what's not, I assume wouldn't be your native language, even though, it doesn't, you sound like a natural born American, which is amazing. So, how did you find that sort of cultural fit initially? And were you in any shape or form, banking on your Armenianness or connecting to your Armenianness in any way to sort of support you in that period?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So I did an exchange program when I was 15 years old. It was a 1-year exchange program. And so I traveled to the US back then, and I learned the language and kind of got introduced to the culture overall in the States. And honestly, at the time, it was a breath of fresh air for me when I just entered the US. I had like my moments of I was homesick and everything, but just compared to the culture that I had in Armenia, a bit more restrictive, patriarchal. How do you say that word? Patriarchal. You got it. So it was so different that I just felt like I can get so much more freedom in the States, and I felt a bit better. And I would come for other conferences later on as well, and just programs, and just keep in touch with a lot of friends in the States. And so coming to the States, from Armenia in 2018, I did not have a cultural shock at all. It was more like coming back to what I would say a second home type of thing.
Right.
Um, however, after I graduated, and I felt very, very lonely because I think the pandemic, obviously, all of us did feel lonely, but it was the fact also that my family wasn't here, and I had I did have some friends, but then it was like we graduated, so I just only met like one or two people here and there. And so I did take advantage of Armenian community support here. So, and after I graduated, in DC, they have a lot of communities, and in LA as well, in San Francisco and all. But one of the communities, like the Gateway Capital Gateway program out of ANCA, I had I lived in a house for 3 months after I graduated with other Armenians, and so that
Right.
kind of helped for 3 months while I was looking for a job. That was really helpful, and the fact that there are Armenian people in the States and they're supporting you and they're there for you, that was really very, very useful for me. I don't belong to any political groups, religious groups, so I don't like to say like I'm part of this community only. So for me,
Yeah.
I just communicate with everyone. But yes, I would say, if that answers your question, I would say that definitely I kind of felt the support from the Armenian community here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a interesting contrast. I think when you're saying it was a breath of fresh air, we just moved back from Armenia. I was living there for about 2 years, and I was staying in a bit more, rural area sometimes in out in Etchmiadzin, and even going to the shops to go buy milk or eggs or whatever, I could always feel this sense that everyone's like looking at me. There's this very like public pressure at all times to sort of fit into a certain mold. Obviously, I looked a bit different, sounded a bit different and stuff. And I think there's a really nice anonymity to like living in West, like coming back to Australia. It's like you can walk barefoot to the shops, like no one cares and no one's gonna, judge you and stuff, which is nice. Um, but then the contrast to that is maybe like similar but not as protracted as yours. When I moved cities in Australia, having the Armenian community to like slot into straight away was extremely helpful. So you don't have this sort of hanging over this vastness for very long, because you can find these organizations, whether you're, and I think I'm similar to you in the sense that I'm not, just belonging to one organization. You can sort of go and find what you need when you need it in the diaspora, which I think is a pretty good, well, from experience, it was pretty amazing thing to have access to when you need it, type of thing. So that sounds like you've had a similar experience. I'd love to learn more about DC's Armenian community, but maybe we can leave that for another time. You've spoken about the origins of your podcast and what you've been working on. So maybe you can just give us some insight of how it felt to start. What were some of the challenges you faced early on, and just give us an update of how everything's going now.
Yeah. I still face the challenges that I started with. But okay, so I started in April, I think, of last year. And then I paused for a little bit in the middle. So I would say that officially the launch was in August of 2024. And It was very awkward and weird for me at first because I've never worked with a camera. And I've done both in person and also virtual interviews like this. Virtual is less stressful. In person is a bit more, you're there with the guest and you're sitting. It's better because you're able to really communicate, but it's also more high stakes. You feel a bit more pressure. Um, it's it's challenging to start anything. I think there's always this uh, you start with a peaking excitement and you're like, oh, this is amazing. This is so much fun. That's how I started. And it's like, I love talking to these people. Everyone is so interesting. You peak, and then there's this, how do you call this? Like the
Drop.
time when, yes, exactly. When
Yeah,
you
yeah.
feel, I think it's called valley of disappointment. you
Right.
you're in there, you're down there, and you're like, I'm not progressing. I'm not getting better. This is not really working. People are not really responding to it the way that I would imagine they should respond to it. So, and then you're slowly learning how to navigate those challenges, and you're like, okay, I think I'm getting a little better. I'm getting the hang of it. And then again, another type of disappointment. So I'm still in those up and down phase where I'm learning a lot. I think that every single day, every single moment, that every single time I record a podcast, I learn from the guest, I learn about myself, I push myself out of the comfort zone. I learn about, so I think it's anything that you start, any initiative that you start at first, it's going to be challenging unless you are super, or unless you have experience in that space, or you are super
Mm.
talented and like it just works out for you. But I think
Yep.
Graham Weaver, this guy out of Stanford, he talks about this quite a bit, and he says it's going to get hard before it gets easy. And I always keep that in mind, that anything that's worth doing, it's going to be really hard at first before it gets easier. So that kind of helped me to push through the challenges that I was and I am facing now.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a really, I think, salient description of, any type of entrepreneurial work where you're leaving, again, just to compare it to, working for someone else, which is just this stable line that goes across, where as soon as you start your own stuff, it's very up and down. And for me at least, sometimes it feels like the end of the world, and you have to remind yourself that everything's okay, and you just got to sort of keep moving forward. um, what sort of strategies do you use when you're in the valley of sorrows? What did you call it? I've sort of
The valley of disappointment. But yes, sorrows
disappointment.
are
Yeah.
definitely there too, I would say. Um, Strategies. I journal. I try to take it as a learning experience. I'm like, okay, this is a challenge. I'm gonna learn from it. I'm gonna try to see what can I learn about myself. I write down my feelings, how I feel about it, and then I write down the factual, what is actually happening and why I'm feeling
Right.
disappointed. And then I try to understand if this is in fact a challenge that I cannot overcome, or it's just my mind playing tricks on me, using expectations that I have about how things should be, but in reality, it's not like that. Um, that helps me. I wouldn't say that it's always does, because sometimes when things pile up and other things happen in your life, and you just, in general, you're feeling pressure or negative emotions, it's really hard because you want to give up. And but yeah, journaling is definitely helpful, and maybe also talking to other people who have pushed through
Mm.
that part, like the valley of disappointment, and just seeing that, actually, like, that's why I started the podcast, is seeing that other people went through a journey and it wasn't easy. It's never easy for anyone, and it always comes at a cost. There are different challenges that we face, but we all face them. And just
Yep.
reminding myself that when we look at someone who's successful, who's just like, has everything that you in your head are aspiring to, um, we always have to see the backstory as well. It's not an overnight success, maybe in some cases, but for most part, it's not. So I try to remind myself of that as well.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I think, yeah, talking to people, especially similar people in similar circumstances, is can be very, very invigorating. I find that sometimes if I'm feeling like unmotivated, or not quite sure, doubting the ideas and that sort of stuff, having the right conversation with someone can just turn that completely on its head, within a matter of minutes or hours, which is pretty amazing. um, I think there's another point here, which is basically going through the struggles, which I I grew up in Sydney, and there's a lot of very nice veneer over Sydney, a lot of success and money and ambition. I think it was hard for young people to sort of admit that they were struggling, because there's this sort of sense that everyone has to have already have made it. And so if you're going through something, or you're trying, or you're in the valley of disappointment, it's
Sorrow.
like some sort of fault, valley of sorrow. Yeah. It's as if you're doing something wrong, or you failed for even being in that situation. So I think sort of shedding the external eyes, if you're in a more shiny city or environment with a lot of success, like for me, I think it's important to remember that everyone's journey is different, and there's nothing uh, like bad about overcoming challenges, or being in challenges and going through them, because it's sort of like, how else are you going to refine yourself and polish yourself and get better if you're not doing anything? If you're just standing and watching, or you're uh, using someone else's success as your own, or whatever else that can be there. Yeah, so just moving on, with the next steps of your podcast. So you're going through these challenges, still going through them. How have you found that initial process, in terms of support? From the people that and obviously having a good network is pretty critical for projects like this one. How have you found that? Maybe you can speak a bit about that.
Yeah, I would say that I can attribute the fact that I'm continuing to do amazing podcasts with great people to the fact that I'm part of the high tech or aero community out of San Francisco, with nurses. He Right, we just sit down together once in a while and we brainstorm who would be a great person to interview for specific topics. For example, building a community. We're going to have an episode on how to build a community, and it's going to be like someone who's really experienced at building the community. And he refers me to these people. He makes the introductions and tells me, okay, this is a good person to interview. I've relied quite a bit on the community in that respect. But I would say that um, I actually interview both Armenians and non-Armenians as well, and more so Armenians, not non-Armenians. But most of the people that I've reached out to, even having like 10,000 obligations and being very high profile, most of them respond and most of them agree to be on the podcast, which I am super grateful for, because I think that it's being on a podcast, it takes time. You devote uh, a substantive amount of time. Well, maybe not substantive, but like 1 hour, and then you also maybe prepare for the podcast, and then maybe you don't like how it like panned out or whatever. But people do agree to chat, and then I've been grateful for that. Yeah, I think that probably is, and I also think I'm getting better at this, so that's why people see that I'm just a good podcast. I'm just kidding. Maybe
um,
not. We'll see.
what would you say is a good, I don't know, strategy for networking? I know it's very dictated on context, where you study, where you work, those sorts of things
Yeah.
have a huge influence. But do you think there's anything else that people could consider other than positioning themselves in the right places?
Yeah. Well, like you said, obviously, like having gone to a good school, uh, definitely opens a lot of doors for you because you have the stamp of approval from someone, which is great. But that's not the only thing. I know a lot of people out of like great schools who are not leveraging their network because they don't know how to. And that's, I think, the one thing that I've learned from my experience as an entrepreneur, as someone who's tried to, let's say, find a job or just do a project, is approach everyone with a mentality of what can I do for you first before you try to get something out of them. Uh,
Right.
I think I genuinely approach people in a way that I really want this to be a relationship that benefits both and has an impact in some way, shape, or form. So it's not just the one way, oh, you do podcast for me and that's it. I really approach it in a way that what can I do? How can I shed light on your story in a way that's going to be impactful for you? Or is there anything that I can do for you? Can I connect you to someone that I maybe know from my network that might be beneficial for you? So that's how I approach every single relationship, and that has helped me to create meaningful connections with people, not just network. Because I try not to network for the purposes of, oh, this is a transaction. No, I try to really establish connections and relationships with people, and then if there are projects or things that we can do together, it happens. It's like it magically comes into being. But I am strategic still. It's not like I have a wishful thinking of, okay, let me just connect to people and then things will happen. I am strategic and I am opportunistic at times, but at the same time, I value people's opinion, I value people's time, I value what they bring to the table. So I think that has helped me quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. It just reminds me of we have this other sort of segment on Kaitak where we just talk about just business stuff, basically business acumen with young people who are operating their own businesses in Sydney. Um, and there was one conversation with this psychologist, which Lisa, she's running her own psychology practice, and we're talking about how if you're basically a good person, like you look at things through not through a transactional lens, but through a lens of just doing the right thing. I think eventually, you might feel like, well, I don't feel this way, but I think some people might think there's a short-term loss for not grabbing at exactly what you're after, like right in that moment, but looking at it as a sort of long-term commitment, and not being what's the word? Sort of like jealous to get something. It's like you're not there for like your pathway to get to. Let's say you want to make money in your business. It's like the quickest path to money is not necessarily the best path, and it reminded me of like my mom. She had a pharmacy for a number of years. A person would come into her shop and they'd be like, "Look, I have she was in the university. They're like, I have a headache. I want some Panadol or I'm not sure what it's called in America. Some aspirin or
Advil,
Advil.
probably.
Advil. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and she'd be like, "Oh, look, if it's just for an exam, you don't have to buy a whole pack. I'll just give you a tablet. It's like worth a couple cents. It's not worth anything." But this sort of gesture of just helping that person in that moment would make sure, not that this was the reason she was doing it, but it would make sure that that person would always come to her for basically the rest of their time that they're at this university. And so it's this being willing to give when you can and when it's appropriate, and that reciprocity comes from most people in return. So I think working in that way is also really good in any sort of work environment. It's sort of working with love and like doing what you think's right, as opposed to purely being tactical and using a strategy. But I think, as you're saying, having both is also pretty crucial. Um,
Yeah. So
yeah.
let's conclude here that I'm a good person.
Okay. Well, that's a good question then. How do you sort of check in with yourself to keep yourself, on an even keel, and make sure you're not leaning too far in one direction or the other?
Being strategic versus being, kind human being.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I really don't, because I tend to gravitate towards being kind human being. And honestly, I even think sometimes that it's a flaw, because I need to be a bit more strategic. So for me, it's more checking in with myself that I'm a little more strategic about my time, for example, because sometimes I can,
Right.
let's say someone needs something and I can spend time with them. And just like your mom, like for instance, when I was running a business in Armenia, um, I would have students who would come to me and ask me for help with, for example, writing an essay to apply for university abroad. And I would just take as much time as I can to make sure that they get the right um, essay, and would devote a lot of time to it, and wouldn't be that strategic about. I was running a business, so I should have been a bit more strategic, but I do not regret. Obviously, like it's honestly, I the gratitude that I get, the fact that these people achieve something because I have like maybe 1% a contribution to them achieving their dreams, and it is a gratitude of its own, and it's a reward of its own. So I do try to strategically plan my day. I try to strategically plan my time and make sure that I don't navigate and I don't stray from the path that I have for myself. But at the same time, I also think that life is more about the relationships and the experiences that we have. And sometimes just any, like, uh, if you spend time with someone and you learn about them, this can be life changing for you. Maybe you'll
Right.
find a partner, a friend, or so yeah, I think that I don't I try to be as to follow my intuition as much as I can, but then also just a little bit more strategic in some cases as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's very interesting. I think that personal connection. Well, you might be realizing this too, but in all my business ventures, or with GuideZark, or with anything that I've tried to start, I've realized that it's all very much about the personal connection. So that's within your network, it's within, your acquaintances, it's within anyone's life who you have any effect on. And if those connections are strong, it's the I feel it's the basis and the foundation to build anything on. um, and it actually, in the Armenian community here, there's, sometimes tension and conflict between groups, but the only thing that cuts through is that personal connection one might have with people in varying groups. So I think that, that might be, as an architect, that's a skill to have, to cut through, issues between consultants, or issues between the builder and the client, or anything like that. So we're really working on those personal relationships, I think, is such a good point, and it's so important. It seems small, and, not, it seems like too easy almost, but it's like that's the thing to really put attention on. So
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
yeah. And I just want to ask, do you like, what would you say if someone wanted to start a podcast, or start a business? Um, what would you say is like the first questions they should ask themselves to know whether it's, something they're seriously going to be committed to, or something that's just a passing idea?
Yeah. That's a very loaded question, and I'll say why. So let me maybe give an advice to someone who is starting out and trying to figure out what they want to do in life. So I would say, if you're young and if you're just starting out, let's say fresh out of university or fresh out of school, for example, right? Then dabble in as many things and projects as you can and experiment as much as you can at first. Um, because later on in life, it's going to be a bit more difficult. You still can, you can do it at any age, but it's just easier to do it when you're younger so that you can understand what type of job, what type of opportunity, what type of business, what type of skill you need. So it's super crucial. I haven't done that. I haven't dabbled in a few things before university or after university. It was more of a guesswork for me. And also in Armenia, it's at the time, now I think it's much better. You are 16, you graduate, and you're immediately, if your parents enforce you to go into a path like a, you just need to go to university, just to choose anything, whatever you're good at. Okay, you're good at languages, just become a linguist, without you taking a minute and thinking, wait, but okay, maybe I am good at languages, that's great, but is there something that I want to do with my life? What is it? So I would say, as you're young, definitely do that. Also think about when you were a kid, when you were, let's say, 5 years old, 6 years old, maybe 10, what did you enjoy most? What were some of your natural inclinations? Let's say you were great at drawing and you loved drawing before someone bit the shit out of you and said, like, no, you have to be a lawyer. Um, were you what were some of the things that really came naturally to you? Like, if you ask yourself that question, that really helps with identifying what direction to take in life. Because, and I think this is not my theory, obviously. It's I'm taking this from Robert Greene, who talks about the natural inclinations that we have and the tendencies that we need to follow to be great at something. It's always about, let's say, if you're working on a project and you're not enjoying it, you hate working on it, the chances of you succeeding in that project and creating, you will still create something, but creating something impactful, something big, is very low, because you're not enjoying the process of creation. You're not enjoying the process of working. And that's where the magic is, from what I think. That's on one hand. On the other hand, learning a skill takes time. So you need to know that at first, if you start something and you're like, this is not for me, I'm not good at it, you might be wrong, because you might go through this, there's another curve, right? So the wait, I don't remember the name of this curve, but so how steep the curve is, the learning curve. Um, Sometimes it can be pretty steep, but then when you go through it and you get better at it, you realize that you are actually enjoying this process. So give yourself some time before you give up a project, because you might not be good at it at first, but if you are enjoying the process, if you feel like, I love podcasting, I feel like I'm kind of good at it, but I'm not great at it, I need to work on this things, just keep going until you get to a certain point, and then you can reevaluate. It's always check in with yourself from 6 months time, 1 year time. It's never late to give up, but there is such thing as you gave up too early. I think it's her
Mm.
personal opinion based on a lot of experience in that area.
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. It sounds like to me what you're saying is it's really important for you to know yourself, and to do that, you need to make lots of choices. You know, do lots of projects, make a bunch of mistakes, to figure out what it is that you are as a person. I think there's one more thing there, which uh, if you have this resource available to you, which not everyone does, but talking to your parents about yourself as a kid. It's like, well, what was I like when I was 3 or when I was 5? What sort of things did I like, which could have been forgotten. But it's important to remember that they're experts on you. If there are any experts on you, it's going to be your parents. Um,
Or I agree. Yeah, and like you said, you need to fuck up a few times to really get to a point where you're like, okay, I can do this. So, but do not be afraid of those early mistakes. They're always good. It's always good to the more mistakes you do or make, the more are the chances that people know, oh, well, not people, but that you know that you're doing something in life. If you're not making mistakes, then it means you're not really pushing your boundaries, or you're not going out of your comfort zone.
Definitely, definitely. And I think the other point that you made was once you figured that out, following a pursuit that you can be passionate about, that you do actually have some sort of inherent skills or desire to do. Um, I think it's such a good point, and it happens for different people. I think at different times, depending on what they like. I've always had this sort of jealousy of musicians, like producers and people who make music, who've discovered it at an early
Yeah,
age,
same.
and can sit at home. It seems like such a fulfilling thing to sit at your computer and do this stuff on your own.
Or
Whereas,
same with
if you're
athletes.
or athletes, yeah, definitely. Oh, that's a big one. Um, and it's so focused and it's so clear, what you want to be doing. I think
Yeah.
if you have, different aspirations, like I can use architecture as an example of what you're talking about, where a lot of people quit too early because it's such a long journey to get to the point where it's actually enjoyable. Um, but you might not know what you want to do because it's not available to young people, or it's only available to people beyond a certain age. If you like, I don't know, politics, or if you like certain, professions that take quite a bit of expertise.
Yeah.
So I think something to add there which tell me what you think, would be to always try to keep an open mind to what's happening within yourself. So you might think you've discovered exactly what it is that you want to do, but there might be more there, and it might come at a different time in your life based on your circumstances or your context. And COVID, you were talking about an identity crisis during COVID. I think in Australia, at least, where the pressure wasn't as high as other countries, the government sort of reacted pretty swiftly here, and a lot of people there was a lot of people who sort of fell through the cracks, but there was still quite a lot of um, you know consistent stability for a lot of the population. It was a bit of a reckoning for people to sort of look within and be like, well, maybe I don't like the career I'm in currently. Maybe I want to try something else. Maybe I want to start a business. So being aware of those moments too, I think is important.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's kind of everything paused for a couple of years, then you were forced to look within because you were confined in a confined space, maybe alone, maybe with a partner, and so you just had to ask a lot of questions. Whereas we live in an age where everything moves fast, and we just lose ourselves in this constant motion of things happening, like changes and social media, everything. It just consumes our attention, and we forget to stop and just look within, like check with yourself where you are, where you're going. Like, is the path that I'm on, if I'm still on this path in 5 years, and where would I get? Would I be happy there? Um, am I happy now? What are some things that are happening to me that really, and it's not about being happy, right? It's about being fulfilled, but also about knowing yourself, growing continuously. I think it's important to check with yourself and make sure that you are going in the right direction. And sometimes right direction means just being aware of what the direction that you're taking, because there's no right or wrong. If you think about it philosophically, right, we're all going to end in the same place one day. um, but are you growing in the process? Are you learning from your experiences? Are you able to become something bigger than you were yesterday, to mold yourself to, I feel like we're born like a clay, and we can mold ourselves into something. And then by the end of life, unfortunately, a lot of people by 30 years old, they just crystallize, they become like a stone, they stop learning, they stop growing, and that really is very sad to me, I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I don't know what it's like in America, but I feel there's a pretty pervasive safety culture, like a perceived safety in, guaranteed work and, living a monotonous life and not taking risks. I remember when I was telling people that I was going to move to Armenia, there was a lot of, pushback. There was two interesting responses. One was pushback. One was like this sense of
Yay, good job.
guilt.
Oh yeah.
Well, it was a good job. Oh, I would have moved if so and so
Yeah.
circumstances were different. I was like, oh, it's fine. You don't have to move. I'm the one going. It's not a problem. Um, but it was like, you've got a good job, you've got, your circles, your reputation, your this, your that. Oh, you're going to leave all that behind to move countries. But the other option is just always be questioning what that would have been like if you don't make those decisions. And I see it amongst a lot of young people where they stifle these choices that they want to be making, but they don't because the context or their parents or whoever it is around them is like, no, 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 that's not a good idea. It's not safe. You're not going to make as much money. You're not going to have as much security. So forget your own ideas that you want
Yeah.
to that have come to you and just push those down because the best option is to just be safe, which I think is much riskier in the long run anyway. I don't think it's actually safe. It's just perceived as safe. Um, yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's very true, especially like if you think about Armenian context. In Armenia, parents push you to become one, or I think not just in Armenia, because I've spoken to people here as well who say the same thing. Armenian parents in the States also do the same thing. They try to make sure that you, obviously out of love, right? They try to make sure that you end up with a safe job. So they push you towards become a lawyer, become a doctor, become, whatever it is that's perceived to be safe and with stability, because yeah, we've been through a lot as Armenians, and so the parents want to protect the child. And I think that sometimes it's great, but sometimes it can stifle you in a way that you forget who you are. Again, this what is unique about you. Maybe you have certain talents, latent talents, things, talents that haven't been um, uh, born yet, even, right? So maybe you have some inclinations, maybe you have some dreams, and you forget all of them, and you move in a direction that your parents like tell you to move. And yeah, in 10 years time, this person is either unhappy, living a monotonous life and just thinking that that's the norm, um, or maybe changing in 10 years, deciding to change, but it's really much more difficult than if they had pursued what was theirs when they were younger. Honestly, like I feel conflicted talking about this, because sometimes I feel like in certain cases when people follow their parents' directions or their parents' advice, it turns out really great. Um, so and maybe that stability is what they need in life to grow. I don't know. So that is also another thing. But just I think every single person needs to try to understand what's inside them and what drives them, what motivates them, what sparks this, the fire in the belly. Because if you're spending 8 hours of your day on work, and if you hate it, or if you're bored, if you don't like it, then essentially we're selling our souls, we're selling our lives for getting money. And to me, that has always been the scariest thing ever, when you are living a life that you don't want to, but you have to,
Hmm.
because you have kids, because you have obligations. I think like I've been always scared of that, and that's why I've been trying to put myself in risky situations to see if I can jump to something and find a career path that excites me, where I feel alive, where I can create, where I can grow. And it all sounds aspirational until you know, there are things that happen in life and then you're like, oh shit, well, maybe I do need stability. So again, I'm giving you conflicting answers. Don't quote me.
No, I think it's absolutely true. Like to the first point of, I think our if we're specifically talking about parents, they've definitely gone through different journeys. A lot have immigrated into new countries, and
Yeah.
they were literally unsafe, or our grandparents were literally unsafe potentially, and that's why they have that culture. I think we're lucky enough, and we've been set up enough, and I'm just talking about people that I know and I interact with, to not have to take that same approach at the expense of potentially putting yourself into a situation that you don't want to be in, which I think is the riskiest situation of all, that you want to avoid completely. And I feel sometimes there's people that I talk to, and they're clearly unhappy. It's very obvious to me that they're unhappy, and they might be obsessing over their career, or whether they're in a relationship, or how they're perceived in the community, whatever the issue might be. But you can see that at some point they've stopped making choices for themselves, and that's stopping them from discovering who they are, in order to then be able to make better choices, to then actually find things that are fitting for them, which then will make them more content, not necessarily happy, but living a life that's actually fulfilling for them.
Yeah.
But I think there's such a strong push. Look, for example, after coming back 2 years after 2 years of being in Armenia, like nothing in a place like Australia, everything's very, very stable. Like nothing had changed. Everyone's doing the exact same things. People in the same jobs. Families are still seeing each other the same way they were. And so I was like, well,
Spiders are
what was
still
the risk?
big. I'm just kidding.
Big, we ride our kangaroos to school and to work, but everything was exactly the same. And so then I asked myself, well, what was this risk that everyone was so concerned about? I'm just slightly older. Not like nothing's. Maybe I lost a bit of, I earned a little bit less money in Armenia than I did here. But
Yeah.
other than that, what's isn't it worth it? Let's say I made a really bad choice. Isn't it worth learning from that bad choice to then make a better choice in future? I think that's the most important thing, much more important than
Yeah,
money and other things. But
definitely.
yeah, I think we're getting it's a very obviously very passionate issue.
Yeah.
Um, but just sort of before we wrap up, I wanted to see maybe you could give us some more advice, but specific to starting a podcast. So I know it's something that's quite in vogue at the moment. A lot of people, we have access to great equipment, and there's a lot of interesting people in the world to interview. So what advice would you give to someone who wants to start one on their own?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I've been taking a lot of classes, like podcasting classes. I was reading a lot on podcasting itself, and now obviously like testing those theories in practice. So I do have some experience. Like I think I can share certain things that might be helpful. I think first and foremost, it's important to understand why you're starting the podcast. So, what is the reason that you want to put it out there? If you don't have a why, just starting a podcast for the reason of it's fun, it's cool, and I can make money out of this is probably not sustainable. You may get some followers, you may get some money out of it at certain point, but I don't think it's sustainable. So understanding the why and thinking about the long-term strategy, as in, okay, I've started this podcast, like this is where it's going, this is my goal, my 1 year goal, my 2 year goal. Thinking about this a bit more strategically is very important. um, I would say number two is identifying your niche. And niche, is it niche or niche, whatever. So niching
People say it
down.
differently. Yeah.
I know, it's crazy. Niching down as much as you can. So starting with a smallest niche possible, and then trying to expand from there. Because I think I've heard this from the VRA Academy that I was attending classes at, and they talk about The Rock. You know the Rock, the bodybuilder. You probably know him.
Dwayne Johnson. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. So he started out with a very niche topic. He was a bodybuilder, right? He and that was the area that he dominated for years, and very few people knew him, only in that circles, right, in the bodybuilding circles. And then he expanded from there into whatever movies and this and that. But before getting his breakthrough, he really dominated a niche, and this is super important to understand that. And number three, which is also related to number two, is understanding your customers. So, who are you making this content for? Thinking about their pain points as you are tailoring the content. So, okay, if I am this X customer persona, right? So, what do I want to hear about this? What type of topics do I want to learn about? What type of questions do I have? Even like just putting it down on just going on Google or YouTube and just seeing like what are some of the questions that people are searching for, the people in your niche are searching for. So that has been super important. And I'm still figuring it out. I'm still like trying to identify the sweet spot where I'm good at, my niche. And so far it's been personal growth and entrepreneurship. That's like the niche that I've taken. I don't know if that's going to be exactly what I will continue doing because things evolve, but I think trying to consciously determine the niche and what you're good at and your area of expertise is super important. And then there are obviously the technical things. You can start with a podcast that is like virtual, and then maybe you have more finances. You can do in-person interviews. I don't know if you're doing interview podcasts, because sometimes podcasts can only be with one person, right? So the technical things are easy as long as you know your why and then you go follow through the system.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So yeah, I think that example of Dwayne the Rock Johnson's pretty interesting. So it's like get really good at one thing,
Yeah.
and then you can start sort of expanding after that point, which I think I'm doing. I do the opposite. I'm sort of fully expanded already.
Did you take a lot of and then well, it's fine. I think as long as you're aware of what you're doing, and if that's what you want to do, I think that's fine. I think there is no hard rule to it, but um again, like it has to be an area where you have expertise or you're good at it or you have something to say, I guess. And that's super important.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. It's very very logical. Yeah, so Lusine, I think our hour was up. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we close up?
No, I think this is a pretty cool thing that you guys are doing with Gaitzak. I like the name. I like the logo, by the way. The Gaitzak behind you, super cool. I was like, is that a shirt with Gaitzak? I should steal that idea and create like a Soulful Entrepreneur t-shirt for myself. I'm gonna do that. But yeah, I think this is pretty cool. I think it's so important to understand who we have within the Armenian community, within the global Armenian community. What are some of the players? What is everyone doing? And we just hear a few names, and we think that that's it. But in the past year, I've discovered so many amazing and cool people that are doing amazing things, like extraordinary things. Um, that I would never have thought of. And so I think that just bringing those stories to people is really great. And the fact that you guys don't discriminate, like I'm a newly minted podcaster. It's not like I'm, super famous yet. Okay. It's gonna happen, people. It's gonna happen. But so the fact that you are also bringing the voices of people who are maybe not necessarily super big yet, is very cool as well. So thanks for doing that, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, no, thanks for the kind words, encouragement. Yeah, I think it's just really important that we sort of start taking a global perspective on ourselves as Armenians and all diasporan communities. It's just we have this absolute wealth of people doing, in different countries all over the world, doing amazing things, and not necessarily utilizing, just having conversations like this one. You learn an enormous amount from, what tracks in a different context. What are these sort of universal things that everyone can do, doesn't matter where they are or who they're with. So yeah, no, thanks for your kind words, and yeah, it's been really great. Thanks for your time as well, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for inviting me.